Welcome to This Week in Morgan County. I'm your host, Russell Mokhiber. Our guest this week is Judge Laura Faircloth. Judge, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We're having the West Virginia Supreme Court visiting Morgan County on April 9th at 10 a.m. How did that happen?
Well, it's actually part of the LAWS program.
What does LAWS stand for?
Well, it stands for, you're trying to check me, I've got that down, it's Legal Advancement for West Virginia Students. And it's sponsored by the West Virginia Supreme Court, and the overall primary goal is to educate students about the legal system in West Virginia. And one of the best ways to do that is to allow the West Virginia Supreme Court to actually sit in different counties and localities throughout the entire 55 counties of West Virginia.
And they will actually be hearing two cases.
They will on April the 9th in the Morgan County Courthouse at 10 o'clock. They will be hearing two cases that typically they would have heard in Charleston, West Virginia at the state capitol. And one of those cases is a criminal case, and one of the cases is a civil case. And the way that it works procedurally is the Supreme Court sits and hears arguments just as it would as if it were in Charleston. The lawyers representing the various parties actually do their arguments in the same way that they would do them in Charleston. The Supreme Court asks questions and conducts their typical oral argument. And then after the court retires from hearing, I think the criminal case will be the first one on the docket, then the students who have been invited to participate in the entire process and be in the gallery, so to speak, will be allowed to ask questions or actually be debriefed by the lawyers who just argued the case to the Supreme Court. So it's an amazing opportunity for students to become personally involved in hearing arguments and then understanding what happened. The way I like to compare it to is you're getting to go to a football game, and after the football game, you get to talk to the players. So it's an amazing thing that West Virginia is doing here.
Did you get to talk to the judges?
Exactly. They do
Will the judges be there also?
Well, yeah, absolutely. All of the 5 justices of the Supreme Court will hear the case. And we started the process back when I was sitting as the judge here in Morgan County. So I'm fairly familiar with what we're trying to do in terms of get all 5 justices in the courtroom and set it up as best we can as they would all sit in Charleston hearing the arguments of the attorneys. And then the students and their teachers from Berkeley Springs High School as well as Paw Paw High School will be sitting in the gallery. They will have already read the briefs. They will understand what the arguments are, so it's not going to be a foreign concept for them. And then after the justices retire from hearing those arguments, the attorneys will turn around and probably say any questions. And then the students will be allowed to engage with the lawyers for a brief period of time. And after all of that is done, for the criminal case and for the civil case, I think that there's a plan anyway that the Tri-County Bar Association will be hosting a reception for the students as well as the justices of the court. So students will actually have an opportunity to meet, shake hands with the justices, and see who they are.
And this is not a mock hearing. These
Oh,
are
absolutely
actual
not.
real hearings of real cases. And I actually went through a couple of the briefs. One is the criminal case is actually a sexual abuse case.
It is.
And the civil case is a medical malpractice case.
Correct.
Where a child died during childbirth.
Right.
And the question was the doctor and the hospital negligent?
Correct. And the jury in that case found that there was no negligence on the part of either the doctor or the hospital. And the appellate error being alleged is that there were many issues that the trial court handled differently than the petitioner, the plaintiff, would have requested. And the interesting thing about this case, although it results from a very tragic event, the death of a child is always a horrible matter. And the issue here legally, different from many appellate cases, is that here the petitioner doctor, and it's the doctor and the hospital who are actually sued, the doctor is cross-claiming against the petitioner or the plaintiff and saying that the legal issue, even if you prevail on your appeal, is that the expert witness on behalf of the petitioner at trial testified incorrectly or erroneously, as we say in the law, as to the locality rule as opposed to the national rule. And what that basically means is the expert witness set the tone of the discussion and the threshold of liability as being what local doctors would have done under the same or similar circumstances, as opposed to arguing and laying the foundation on what the national standard would be. So that's the issue before the court as it relates to an overall legal premise.
Just getting back to what happens after the arguments are made in the courthouse. The students get to interact with the lawyers.
They do.
But do the students get to interact with the justices?
Not at the courthouse. Our hope, however, is that they'll be able to speak to the justices one-on-one during the reception that will occur afterwards in Berkeley Springs.
Where's the reception going to be?
It's yet to be determined. We're thinking that it might be at the historic inn in Berkeley Springs.
At the Country Inn?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is this event open to the public other than to students?
It certainly is, but I would like to emphasize that we only have space for so many people in the courtroom, and that would be about 100, and my understanding is that all of the students are going to be taking up the spaces for people to sit. There might be an opportunity, and I would invite any of your viewers to inquire of the courthouse and security, whether they might be able to be out in the foyer and be able to at least listen to arguments from there. But the good thing is that all of the students throughout the entire state would be able to have it something that they can look at through archived online availability. So this isn't just going to be for those 100 very lucky students that are going to be in the courthouse on April the 9th.
But also we were told by, correct me if I'm wrong here, we were told by the Supreme Court that live streaming, you could put a camera in the courthouse and live stream it. We have a digital media center here. Would that be possible?
Now, I'm not going to speak for the Supreme Court on that issue, but if they told you you could, then that's amazing. I just don't want to say you can and then the Supreme Court later say for some reason that wouldn't be permissible. But if they said to you that they would allow that, then I think that's an opportunity everybody ought to take advantage of.
Is this a first for Morgan County? First time the Supreme Court has argued here?
To my knowledge, it is. It's not the first time the Supreme Court has participated in other community areas of West Virginia. I can remember back in the olden days when I was a lawyer, I actually participated in a similar event when the West Virginia Supreme Court sat at the WV Law School. And I argued one of my cases, actually I think two of my cases in front of the court there. And the students of the law school were sitting in the courtroom.
Now, what's the capacity of the Morgan County? How many students can we fit in there?
I think 100, and we're going to have 100 there is what my understanding is.
And does that mean that the Supreme Court has already been in touch with the schools in Morgan County?
They have.
To arrange for the students to be there? Because I know we have a great civics course at the high school where I'm sure that class would be interested. And so I'm sure that there's going to be interest among the students.
And I think that the Supreme Court has done an amazing job in selecting the cases that they will actually hear in Morgan County because they're interesting. Some cases are very, very important, particularly to the parties involved, but they are very detailed, maybe with regard to statutory interpretation and minute details of the law. These are interesting cases that affect everyone one way or the other. So I'm sure that it's going to be a very good opportunity for the students. And
what is actually, from your understanding of this program, what is actually the purpose? Why do you want students to come hear the Supreme Court?
Well, first of all, we want our students, our future generations, to understand the law and the process, and that we are a country of law and a country of rule, and not of the men and the women who actually hold the offices. I think Plato probably said it best, and I'm going to paraphrase, but he said, the true test of the existence of a republic is the education of the future generations, who will teach them, and what they will be taught. So I think that this is the West Virginia Supreme Court's way of reaching out to instill patriotism and love of country and of the law in all of our students so that they can gain an advantage firsthand of watching how it works.
And I do some stand-up comedy in Morgan County, and
Well, some would say judges do as well, so I'm with you.
and this just came off the top of my head when I was doing it at Troubadour. I asked how many people here support the First Amendment, and about half the people, roar. How about the Second Amendment? Roar. How about the Seventh Amendment? And nobody knew about the Seventh Amendment right to jury trial.
Right.
And my kids went through Berkeley Springs High School. We did some homeschooling in high school. And my sense is that there's not good understanding of the law among the population generally.
I think that's true. And I think one of the reasons that that's come about is because we have become a little complacent and somewhat spoiled in the liberties that our forefathers fought for and in the Constitution that we now take for granted. Everybody knows in this country you're entitled to your rights, your equal rights. But I think that we've lost so much track of history in terms of what it used to be like before this country set the example for the rest of the world. And that's a tragedy. I do believe that the West Virginia Supreme Court is trying to embrace that and help educate our current students and future generations to come so that they see what goes on firsthand. We all know about what goes on in Congress, and we know about what goes on in the executive branch because it's on television all the time. The courts have always historically been different because they're not supposed to be influenced by public opinion or what the pendulum has swung to one way or the other. They're supposed to be insulated and apply the law as the law reads to the facts of each individual case. And sometimes, particularly in the criminal matter that you and I were talking about earlier, where there's a sexual abuse charge, it's against the person at the time was 16 years old and he was babysitting 2 minor children. And the identity of those minor children need to be protected. They're entitled to their privacy. So because of issues like that, we don't have the microscope, if you will, on the judicial system as it plays out every day. And that's what the Supreme Court is trying to foster, I think, in allowing students to actually watch what happens in the courtroom. Anybody can come to a court proceeding as long as it is not closed. Now, in our abuse and neglect docket and our juvenile delinquency docket, not everyone can come in because they're juveniles and their identities are protected. However, for other cases, civil cases, all criminal cases, the public is always welcome. But usually, trial goes on between 9 and 4 or 8 and 4, up to 5 o'clock maybe. And most people who might have an interest are either working or busy taking care of children and family, so they don't have the opportunity to get up and walk into the courtroom. And there are very strict rules about public television in the courtroom. The media is allowed, but they have to follow certain rules. They have to read the rules. They have to sign off that they've read them and that they will abide by them. For example, they're not allowed to photograph the jury. There are other things that the media is not allowed to do in the courtroom. So the American people don't get to see the judicial system function the way they see the president function or the Congress function.
But this is going to be great for the students because they can actually be in the courtroom. They get to talk with the lawyers afterwards and maybe with the judges at the reception.
Right.
So this is going to be good for Morgan County students.
I think it's amazing.
Yeah, and so what is your experience on young people who are interested in law going to law school? It seems as if there's very few young people graduating from our schools who go on to law school. Do you think that's true? Is that true, and why is that true?
Well, I'm a little surprised that that's the idea. There are a lot of students from our schools who would like to go to law school, but law school is not easy to get into. First of all, you have to have a really good GPA. Secondly, you're competing with everybody else in the country to get into a law school. And then there's the dreaded LSAT, which is the law school admission test. And that takes hours and hours of studying and preparation for students to think in a way that you and I wouldn't normally think. It has very little to do with knowledge going into law school. It has more to do with the way the law schools want you to demonstrate in 3 hours of a test how you would analyze something. And it's gotten to be so competitive that students often have to pay for a course to study how to take the test, or a tutor, or both. And so I don't think it's that our students don't maybe want to go to law school. I think that they might be discouraged that the numbers of applicants are so great in comparison to those who are actually accepted. And that's a real shame, because there are a lot of very qualified students who might not do well on standardized testing and simply don't think they can make the grade to get into the law school of their choice. And that is discouraging.
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but my sense is that applications to law school have been going down over the last 10 years.
They may have, and I think overall there is a real community sentiment that lawyers are just bad people. And so you don't want your kids to grow up to be lawyers. You'd rather have them be cowboys and such, if you follow the song I'm talking about. Yeah. And that's a shame, because being a lawyer is a noble profession. Lawyers, like every other profession, have some really great examples of character, and then some not so great examples.
And that brings us to, finally, the reputation of the West Virginia Supreme Court, which has taken a hit in the last couple of years. Well-publicized corruption scandal, Chief Justice going to jail, 3 new justices as a result appointed. So what impact has that have? You're a practicing judge here in the Eastern Panhandle.
Correct.
What impact has that had on the community, the public perception of lawyers, the public perception of the Supreme Court, and of judges generally, especially from your experience?
From my experience on a personal level, I haven't had anyone actually talk to me, or even in my presence, about how they feel about the legal system today versus how they felt about it before everything occurred with the West Virginia Supreme Court. But what I do believe that I'm hearing from people is a challenge to do better, not only from the circuit judges, but as well from those new justices on the Supreme Court and those who are still sitting on the court who didn't take the hit because the Senate of West Virginia decided, apparently, that they didn't have actual knowledge and that there wasn't anything that they could have done to have prevented the wrongdoing of the Chief Justice, who actually was sentenced to jail.
You are referring to the impeachment proceedings.
Correct.
Where the House impeached the entire Supreme Court.
Correct. In a historic move. I don't think it's ever been done with any Supreme Court in the United States where all of the sitting justices were impeached.
And the Senate did not convict them.
Correct.
But what led to that? Was that just like political atmospherics that led to let's just impeach all of them? Was that what was that about?
You know, I really don't know, because I tried very hard to focus on what I was doing as a circuit judge and let the process work its way through. So I didn't have any personal conversations with members of the House or members of the Senate, and I just have to believe, because I believe in the Constitution and in the system that our forefathers gave us, so I have to believe that the right outcome was reached.
Well, hopefully this puts, that bad set of circumstances behind the Supreme Court, and this is a very positive thing that's happening.
It truly is, and it gives the students an opportunity to see what really happens on a day-to-day basis in the West Virginia Supreme Court.
All right, so it's April 9th.
April 9, 10 o'clock, Morgan County Courthouse.
Morgan County Courthouse. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure meeting you.
Same here.
And thank you for watching This Week in Morgan County.